Hello.
Hi.
How's everybody doing?
Very well.
Good.
Right.
How are you doing, David?
I am well also.
Great.
I got a vaccination, my first of two, and I get my second one this week, and I'm very excited about all that.
That's great. I get my second one tomorrow in Gilroy.
Oh, nice.
I
Congratulations.
get my second one tomorrow too.
Excellent.
Good for you, Roland. Like I reserved the whole day to get my second vaccination.
Well, I'm getting mine on Saturday, and I put the whole day on Sunday aside just because I know enough people have gotten quite ill.
Yeah. I didn't feel anything hardly from the first one, but I think they tell me.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Mayor.
Oh, Mr. Mayor.
I'm ready. I didn't know we were having our meeting today until I was halfway to Sacramento, so I had to turn right back once I got there.
Oh, goodness.
Wow.
So an agenda did not go out, right? Just the overview of what's going on.
So we sent out an agenda via an email, but it's through accessing the website. A physical agenda was not attached to the email.
Okay. All right. Well, let me go through the city website, you're saying?
It'll be at the Hollister2040.org website.
Yeah, we can make sure we get an agenda out to the members. It'd be helpful.
I'll post the link to the chat. Just give me a minute.
Yeah.
Do you guys prefer to have them delivered to you somehow on paper or as an email?
No, as long as we can get them early enough to give us all a chance to get through it.
Okay.
It would be helpful.
Yeah, we did publish the background material on Friday of last week, but it sounds like maybe
We didn't
went into spam filters or
didn't
something.
go out until today. So let me try to.
So there's also an e-blast that goes out too, that also provides a link to all the materials as well.
Yeah, I prefer to have it as well ahead of time. Maybe even a Google invite just so we can have it on our calendar, and then the agenda linked in the email. That would be really helpful too.
Right.
I didn't realize we had a meeting until this morning as well, or whenever we emailed. I think it was
Right.
afternoon.
Okay.
I'm on the site now. Where is the agenda?
Well, Carrie posted a link in the chat. If you can see the chat, you can just click on that.
Let me go back to the chat here. Okay. Give me a second. And we'll get started on this. Perfect. All right, let me know when we have everyone here so we can go ahead and call this meeting to order.
I think we're still waiting for Roxanne and,
I just got an email from her saying she needs me to re-forward the link. So hang on one second.
okay. And what about Larry? Do we know his status?
I talked to him this afternoon, so he should have the link because he said he was going to call me back if he didn't get it when I resent it to him. So he didn't call me back. So he should have it and hopefully we'll join in soon.
Okay.
So I'm at the website now. It's Gpac meeting number 4, and then Gpac meeting number 4 agenda, and then all of the little attachments underneath it would be like the agenda. What do you call it? The agenda packet, sorry.
Yeah, that's correct, Roland. Those are all the meeting materials for tonight.
Perfect, thank you.
So, and maybe to say to all of you while we're waiting, there will be a meeting every Tuesday for almost for the next 6 weeks. There's one we skip, but so it would be great to make sure that you guys have those on your calendars all the way through April 27th. April 20th is the one we miss.
I'm excited about it. One thing we can do is just send out a Google Calendar for all of those, and it should save on our calendars. That would be so helpful. Thank you.
Great.
Yes.
Amber, would you be the one to do that, or does Carrie do that? Who will send that?
The city can provide that.
Okay, great. And then you can expect that each week, either Thursday or Friday, you will receive another email with the packet for the following week.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. That's great. Shrink this thing down. All right. Do we have the other members on yet?
Mr. Rebecca is logging in now, Mr. Mayor,
Okay.
and it looks like everyone else is here.
Right.
Johnson's on. Okay. Great.
And
Mr.
that's-
Evans, welcome.
Looks like just so people know, we have 3 others in the audience.
Hello, thank you. Happy to be here.
Your timing's perfect. You go for the ride right now. All the
Yeah, welcome
exciting
on
stuff.
board.
Hey, I got the emails and the materials all ready to go.
All
Great.
Thanks, ladies.
right, let me know when Mr. Rebecca is on and we can get started.
Yeah, maybe both.
Yeah, I'm on, Mr.
Okay,
Rebecca.
Mr. Rebecca, excellent.
Okay. And
Go
Ms.
ahead, Mr.
Johnson,
Rebecca.
we don't see your face, which is fine, but you're able to hear us and mute
Yes,
yourself?
I'm on and I can hear you fine.
Great. Okay, good. So Mr. Mayor, I think we can start.
Great, thank you. At this time, we'll call to order the meeting of March 23rd, 2021, General PAC Advisory Committee meeting, number 4. If we could, Mr. Early, maybe do an introduction, have all the new members, I'll have all the members introduce themselves, give a little background, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
We have the time. So I'll
Yeah.
start. I'm Ignacio Velasquez, Mayor, City of Hollister. Mr. Resendez, do you want to go and follow?
Yeah, I'm Roland Resendez, Vice Mayor, City Hollister, and just I'm excited and welcome to all the new members on the Gpac.
Mr. Huboy?
I'm David Huboy, local architect, planning commissioner, and welcome on board, Larry. I haven't seen you for a while. Carol, it's been a while there too, and it's great to have you guys on board with along with you, Chris. It's going to be quite a ride we're going to have, sure.
Ms. Stevens?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity. I just want to say, first of all, I am on the Planning Commission. I've been serving with Mr. Huboy for like the last 2.5 years. So I'm excited to start as a GPAC member. I don't know if there's anything else that you want me to say, but
No.
just thanks for the opportunity, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Excited to have you all
glad to
aboard.
have you, Roxanne. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Ms. Johnson?
Hi, my name's Carol Johnson and I've been a resident in Hollister for some 43 years now. I used to work for the city of Hollister in the building department for years and years and years, and also in other departments within the city. So thank you for allowing me to be on this committee because I'm very excited about what we're going to discuss and moving forward with our community in a good way.
Thank you for joining. Mr. Evans?
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Evans. I'm a resident here. My family moved to Hollister in 1988. I'm a class of 98 grad, go Baylors. I'm also the co-founder of Growing Hearts Garden Center, which is a nonprofit here in town. And we service adults with special needs and do community projects and things like that. And I'm excited to be part of this committee. I have, 4 children in the community. And like I said, I've been a resident since '88. And so I'm happy to see the next 20 years and what happens. Thank you.
Welcome on board. Mr. Rebecca?
Yeah, my name is Larry Rebecca, and I've been in Hollister since 1975. I actually came in March, so it's been 46 years. And I'm very interested in the growth of the community. I'm a retired teacher. I taught for 34 years. And Carol is my neighbor, and I got you beat by 3 years, Carol. I'm very, very interested in what's going to happen, the general plan. Very interested. Thank you.
Again, welcome everyone. This is a very important document we're all working on. It's important to keep an open mind on this, go through the process. Mr. Early leads us through this process, through a lot of the meetings they've had with the community, gives us input, and then we all work together to make the final decisions or the direction moving forward. So thank you again, everyone involved, and all of you in the public that have participated in the Gpac planning so far. All right, Mr. Early, you want to take it from there?
Yeah, there are a couple of sort of formal agenda items, but I can help to walk through those as well. I think everyone's pretty familiar with Zoom. The agenda does show an overview of Zoom meeting procedures, but with the mayor's support, I'll skip that item. And then the next item is that Gpac members, I believe, are required by city regulation to report on any public feedback or other meetings they might have had on any items since the last meeting. I don't know that that would have occurred, but it's on the agenda to ask.
Okay.
If I may, if this is the right time to disclose that I also, my activities on the Green Business Committee with the Chamber of Commerce, and also the Public Art Review Committee that is affiliated with the San Benito Arts Council. It was back, I don't know, a couple months ago that I received or worked with the Green Committee to develop some policy recommendations that I forwarded to Abraham. And I just want to make sure everyone has those policy recommendations that came from the Green Business Committee. And along with that, also some policy recommendations that came from the Public Art Review Committee and also the Arts Council. So I'm trying to go along with the protocol on dissemination of information. If I receive the information, it would go to Abraham, and then hopefully he would disseminate the policy recommendations to everyone that's involved with the committee. So I'd be happy to follow through on that, because when we do go into the arts element and also sustainability, I'd like to kind of track these recommendations.
Yeah, let's make sure that we do distribute those in advance of the correct meetings. So I think arts is the 4th meeting, and we have some policies regarding sustainability in the climate action planning on the 5th meeting. So Carrie and Amber and Eva, maybe we can make sure we distribute those in advance of those meetings with the packets.
Great.
Thank you, sir.
Any other items from Gpac members about disclosure of any contacts since the last meeting? All right, hearing none. The next item is public comment on items that are not on the agenda. We will have a public comment period after my presentation tonight for all the items collectively that are on the agenda. But if there's anyone who wants to speak on any item not on the agenda, now would be the time to raise a hand. And I do see Kevin Henderson. I'm facilitating. I don't know if I actually know how to recognize people. Is there someone else who, oh good, looks like somebody did it. I think it was Eva. So Mr. Henderson, you're unmuted and you may go ahead and speak. And again, this is for items not on the agenda tonight.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, and what is my time limit?
3 minutes.
So, so I wanted to point out that this committee is not following its own bylaws. So I'm requesting as a member of the public that this meeting be adjourned until some issues can be properly addressed by the city council. I'll outline the problems that need to be resolved. First, the Gpac committee bylaws were just adopted by the city council on March 1st by resolution 2021-37 under Exhibit A. So item 3 on Exhibit A says committee members shall elect by majority vote a chairperson and a vice chairperson. So our current chair and our vice chair have not been elected by the majority of the 7-person committee. The members of the public who are part of this committee should have the right to vote on who your chair and vice chair should be. Therefore, meetings should not continue until voting on the chair or vice chair can be agendized. And item number 2 in your bylaws, the Gpac shall consist of 7 members appointed by the city council. Notice it does not say appointed by one member alone, but it means by consensus of the council as a whole. So a member of the public should be able to review the past city council minutes and resolutions to figure out when each member of this committee was appointed. So we know we have 3 brand new members of the public who were just appointed on March 15th. That's clear. Roxanne Stevens was appointed to the Gpac on February 16th, 2021 by consensus of the city council. That is clear. Now, Mayor Velasquez and David Dubois were originally appointed by consensus of the council on February 5th, 2018 under resolution 2018-27. However, on March 1st, the city council just voted to quote rescind and replace City Council Resolution 2018-27. So technically, those 2 appointments are now nullified at this point in time.
Have we, excuse me for a second, have we reached that 3-minute point?
No, Mr. Mayor, the timer is on and I'm tracking it. We're at
Okay,
about
thank
2
you.
minutes.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, lastly, we have Vice Mayor Resendez, who was not appointed by consensus of the City Council on April 20th, 2020, but by action of the mayor alone. You might ask, how can somebody get appointed to the Gpac without consensus? Well, the reason is it was able to happen is because the Gpac bylaws don't specifically state how to handle the case of a member passing away. And at the April 20th meeting, it was assumed that the appointment of Resendez was to replace the late council member Marty Richmond. However, a public records request to the city clerk reveals that there is no document that exists of council member Richmond being appointed to the Gpac. Therefore, given the above, I think this meeting should be adjourned immediately until these issues can be properly addressed by the city council. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I'm gonna, although I know there's been an assertion that the meeting doesn't have a proper chair, I think what we should do is first find out if there are any other public comments about items not on the agenda, and then I'll turn it over first to the chair and then to any others who want to be recognized to address what we just heard. Are there any other members of the public who would want to speak on an item not on the agenda? All right, seeing none, then I will turn it over to the mayor as the current chair for any comment that you may have or any guidance or direction, and we can certainly hear from other committee members as well.
Thank you very much. The procedures were followed correctly. Originally, there were 3 members of this general plan committee. Those 3 members did vote to place the chair and the vice chair. All the other procedures have been followed correctly. I understand some people might not like the result of it, but that is what happened. We provided a fair process, and we are now into meeting 4, and we're going to continue as planned. Thank you.
Do any other Gpac members want to speak to the issues raised by Mr. Henderson? All right, then hearing none, I think we can go on, and we've now accomplished the public comment on items not on the agenda. The next item on our agenda is new business, and it's really one large item that'll take the entire evening. We have put together a series of policy options for you. They're quite extensive, and they will be extensive. As a couple of you said, it's going to be a wild ride over the next 5 weeks, and I think to some degree that's true. I'm going to give a presentation about these items, which is going to include, for the benefit particularly of the 3 new committee members, I know you've followed what the Gpac has done, but I'm going to include some brief introduction about the work on the general plan overall, and then I'll present information on all the items all together. I want to let the members of the public in particular know that we're going to have a single comment period. First, we'll take Gpac questions about all the issues I've raised. They don't have to be complete questions. We can come back to the Gpac members after any questions after my presentation. Then there will be a single comment period. And then once that comment period has ended, then I'm going to walk you through each of the items for your comment and direction. We obviously haven't done this before as a group. We also have 3 new members tonight, or 4, I should say. And so we don't have a lot of experience with all of you working together. I'm not 100% sure that we'll finish tonight. Maybe it'll go really fast and we'll be done by 8. I think it's more likely but possible that we'll go at a good pace and be done by about 8:30. And if we get to 8:30 or even 8:20 and it's clear that we're not going to finish this evening, I'm going to suggest that we table some items for next week's meeting and then figure out over time whether we can pick up the pace in future meetings or if we'll need to even schedule a 6th meeting at some point in the future. But for tonight, we will end right around 8:30 or before and see where we've gotten. I'm going to now share my screen, if I can figure out how to do that. There we go. But that was the wrong item to share. There we go. Now I need to bear with me while I do this. All right. So this is the beginning of the presentation. So let me dive in and just go through the first few slides to give a little introduction to the process. And then before I go into tonight's content in particular, I'll ask for any questions about anything I just talked about, as well as anything that I'm about to say in terms of the presentation. So this is, as it says here on the screen, this is meeting number 4 of the General Plan Advisory Committee, and the first of 5 meetings, and hence part 1 on policy options. And as I mentioned earlier in the meeting, there will be a total of 5 of these meetings, essentially consecutive Tuesdays. We are missing April 20th, but then there will be a meeting on April 27th. So there will be meetings, including tonight, on 5 of the next 6 Tuesdays. And tonight we have already had the call to order. We've had the public comment on items not on the agenda. And now we're in this item of new business. I'm going to give the presentation on these general plan background and the policy options. We'll open it up for questions from the Gpac. We'll then have public comment and then Gpac discussion. And then the summary and next steps will be just to remind you all that we will be meeting again in a similar format in a week. Gpac meeting procedures are outlined here. I want to let you know that meetings are being recorded. The meetings do always begin with a brief roll call and brief overview. We do always have public comment periods for items not on the agenda, as well as the agenda items. Speakers do have 3-minute time limits, and there is both an ability to register online to give comments, or also if you're there, this meeting is not happening in person, but sometimes as meetings do open up, it will be possible to complete a blue speaker card and provide it to staff for an in-person meeting. I should point out for all, particularly for the new Gpac members, but also for the public and all the Gpac members, that under the Brown Act, and these meetings are subject to the Brown Act, the Gpac can only give direction and guidance on items that are on the agenda. So new items that may be brought up during public comment the Gpac can ask that they be agendized for a future meeting, but cannot have an actual discussion or action on a new item. So we've had the public comment on items not on the agenda, and I'm going to move on and talk about a little background about the general plan. So a general plan in California is essentially a blueprint for growth, development, and conservation. The courts have called it the Constitution for growth and development in any community. Just like our state constitution or federal constitution, it doesn't have all the rules in it, but it does have the basic vision and supporting goals, policies, and actions that underlie all the planning, growth, development, and conservation within the community. So in that sense, it provides a consistent direction for future development. It's intended to balance growth, conservation, and quality of life, and it also documents baseline environmental conditions. The general plan is required by law to have a series of 7 elements. Element really means chapter, but it's called an element because the general plan doesn't have to be arranged in any particular order of chapters. And so they're called elements to denote the fact that they could be lumped together or separated in various ways. The current general plan has 6 individual chapters that cover the 7 required elements. Those are land use and community design, circulation, housing, natural resources and conservation. In that case, the name of the state required element is conservation. There's a state required open space element that covers open space and agriculture. And then there's a single health and safety element, which covers the state mandate for a safety element as well as a noise element. State law also allows general plans to have additional elements that are optional and customized to the community. Hollister's general plan already has one of those, which is the community services and facilities element. And through this general plan update, we are adding an arts element and an economic development. And we will also be adding some policies regarding environmental justice, which is now a required topic under state law, although the city of Hollister doesn't have any communities within it that fall under the state mandate for an environmental justice element. It's still been identified as an issue that's very important, and we will be talking about it in these policy meetings. Your current general plan, which I personally think is a quite strong document, was last updated in 2005. So it's 16 years old now. General plans are normally written with a 20-year time horizon and intended to be updated every 10 years or so. And so we are at a point where it's high time to update it, to bring it up to code, to bring it up to state guidance, and to address new issues that have arisen in these last 16 years. But again, it's a very strong document. And really what we're doing is modifying it rather by any means than starting over. There's no need to start over because it is a strong document already. This general plan update process has a series of goals that have already been adopted by the city council. First off is to engage a broad spectrum of the community. We've been holding a lot of community workshops. We've been gathering data through online surveys and our website. We're reaching out to the Spanish-speaking community as well. And so we're really working to engage a broad spectrum of people. We're also working to establish the community's vision for Hollister in 2040. The current general plan doesn't have a vision statement, and we have already drafted one with oversight by the Gpac. Other goals are to maintain the small town agricultural character of Hollister, to manage growth consistent with community goals, to ensure high quality development, to support economic development, and to respond to new state mandates and general plan guidelines that have been developed over these last 16 years. The project actually has a lot of components that go beyond the general plan update. The general plan update certainly sits at the center of it, but we're also doing implementation of Senate Bill 743 that addresses the way traffic impacts are assessed. We're preparing a climate action plan, a hazard mitigation plan, an environmental impact report to cover all of the other documents. And then once that's all done, we'll also be completing a municipal service review, which is the document that LAFCO needs to process any changes to the sphere of influence or to actually annex lands into the city of Hollister. We are looking at quite a broad planning area. You can see that in this picture that's on the map here. We're looking at an area that's not only the city limits, which are shown with the black line, the existing sphere of influence, which is shown with the yellow dashed line. There's a larger urban service area or Hollister urban area that's shown here in red. That's an area that the city has previously considered extension of sewer service within. And then much larger than that even is what we call the planning area, shown with the purple line here. And that's an area that probably won't ever all be annexed into the city, but where any development or change that happens within this area would have an effect on the city of Hollister. And so we plan for that area and we develop city policy and guidance about it, even though much of that outside area may well stay under county auspices for this foreseeable future. The process that we're in now is with regard to a series of policy options. We have issued a policy option document and we have a survey available online. That survey is open now. It has been open since March 5th and will be open through April 16th. We did also hold 2 virtual community workshops last week on March 9th and 10th and got a lot of really great feedback, actually 2 weeks ago, March 9th and 10th, got a lot of great community feedback, which has been summarized in a memorandum for tonight's meeting, and then there will be summarized moving forward for the subjects at the future meetings. As I already mentioned, we're now in the first of 5 Gpac meetings tonight, next week, March 30th, April 6th, April 13th, then skipping a week, and then April 27th. We will be having then a review of the Gpac results by the Planning Commission in May and a review by the City Council in June. We are still working on dates for each of those meetings, but we'll be reaching out to both the Council and the Planning Commission about them in the coming weeks. And so this is our process overall and where we are today. We have, as I mentioned, we've already finished both the vision and also a baseline conditions and future trends assessment. We're now doing policy assessments and design alternatives, which will last through the spring. And once that's complete, we'll start working on the general plan itself and those other work products that I mentioned, the climate action plan, the local hazard mitigation plan, which is already underway, as well as the environmental impact report. Those will all be published as actual draft documents in fall of this year. And then it'll actually take about another 9 months for first the Gpac to review them and then the Planning Commission and City Council with public workshops as well. So there's a lot of work already behind us, but a lot of work coming up right now. And this really is these next 5 weeks for the Gpac, followed by the Planning Commission and City Council meetings. This is really a key time to be setting the policies that will appear in the general plan itself. This just gives you an overview of the values and vision statement that we've put together. This has already been acted on by the Gpac before some of you joined it, but we got very good input from the public, and then we got great input from the Gpac itself. We drafted a series of 4 values that you can see here: equity, diversity, innovation, and sustainability. And we also drafted a vision statement, which is here in its entirety, which is to say it's quite brief. It's not a couple hundred pages like a full general plan. It's really a 1-page document that tells where Hollister wants to go in the future as a place, what it says here, where people come to live, work, and play. People living here because of the strong sense of community, the diversity, wide range of housing types and income for all levels, surrounded by the Diablo range and agricultural uses, a wonderful historic past, small town charm, high quality design, and strong architectural character. This vision also identifies Hollister as an innovation hub, attracting businesses to the downtown, the industrial park, and the airport, also serving tourists en route to the Pinnacles National Park, surrounding wineries, and the state recreational vehicle area, all of these being important economic development tools. The vision talks about transportation and multimodal transportation by a whole series of modes, the city having a vibrant downtown and a very strong community and cultural life, with new growth focused in existing urban areas and adjacent to existing development, and well coordinated with San Benito County. So those are some of the key points in this vision statement. If you haven't had a chance to read it, I encourage you to take a look at it, and it will appear as sort of a centerpiece of the general plan itself. In these meetings over the next few weeks, we're going to be looking at this list of 24 different topics, and the first 8 of them are tonight: parks, new school funding, farmland mitigation, sensitive habitats, heritage trees, historic and cultural resources, coordination with local tribes, and environmental justice. And these were all topics, this is, I know, a daunting list, but let me tell you that we did look at these at the public workshops that we had several weeks ago, and small groups working for 15 and 20 minutes at a time were able to get through roughly a third of each of this list. So I do think it's possible for you tonight to get through the entire list over the course of a couple of hours. So that concludes my presentation. The next part of this presentation is to talk about all of these items from parks through environmental justice. But let me just stop here and ask quickly, and perhaps there are none, but are there any questions from the Gpac right now? Commissioner Dubois?
I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
Somehow I got the idea back a ways when we worked on the vision, the draft vision statement, that the city council would have a chance to have a conversation about that. I don't know if that was submitted to city council or not.
Yeah, that has not happened yet. For reasons of efficiency, our scope shows that that will happen at the same time that the results of these 5 meetings happen. So it definitely is on the docket for the council to review it, and it will be one of 2 major items, that and then the results of these policy discussions that come before the council at a later time.
Great, thank you. And the other question I had is regarding the online survey. Is that bilingual?
It is intended to be bilingual, and I'm going to need to look to other staff to let me know whether the bilingual version is up and available yet.
Okay.
I can answer that, David. It's not available yet, but it is a work in progress.
Okay, thank you.
And we will keep it up. I mean, as we've said, it'll be up at least through April 16th. We are right now looking at scheduling a Spanish language meeting that may be a little later. And if necessary, we'll keep both the English and Spanish versions up to make sure that everybody gets a chance to see them.
Great. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to go on and try and as quickly as possible go through these Parks and Recreation, go through all of the 8 items tonight. The first one being Parks and Recreation. A little background. One of the major issues that we'd like you to look at tonight is the standard for park provision among, oh, Roxanne, I see your hand up now. Did you mean to raise your hand?
Can I just ask a procedural question?
Yes,
So if
please.
I do want to ask a question, then should I raise my hand? Because I did want to ask a question. I don't think you saw me.
Right.
So should I use the raised hand?
There are few enough of you, just 7, that I think you can just go ahead and speak up.
Okay.
Especially
So can
because
we, can I just go back and ask a question about that list of priorities? Okay, the policy topics. So a few times during when I was not on the advisory committee, but I was part of just public participating in these meetings, I did bring up the point about marketing and branding. And I'm just wondering if that's something that's included within one of these topics, or if that is something that just didn't come up as a policy topic in the public.
No, it's very much covered. If you look at items 9 through 15, those are all economic development topics. They start with economic development broadly, and then they go through a lot of subsets of economic development. And particularly when we look at item 9, economic development, and item 12, tourism, you will be getting a chance to talk about marketing and branding in particular.
Okay.
And then that also, of course, applies to the airport as a facility that the city might market for economic development purposes, cannabis as well. And in all of those, they do have some marketing and branding.
Within those policy topics. Okay,
items
good.
9 through 15.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, and for the rest of you, when I do stop again for questions, feel free to just speak up. With the screen shared, I actually can't see all of you at once. So if you raise a hand, I don't necessarily see it. I'm sorry for that. Let me just give an opportunity for others to speak up. Is there anybody who wanted to ask a question before I go into the 8 topics?
I do.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Just generally speaking, how has the results been of the survey, like as far as like people participating?
Carrie, can you speak to that also?
Sure. I would say our participation has been okay. I think it could be better. So we will continue to promote it on social media and send out e-blast reminders, trying to stir up more responses before the survey closes in mid-April.
We did have about 40 people attend between the 2 workshops. And felt very good about that. And you are getting summaries of those comments before each meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate what Roland said about the survey. I have been passing the cards out, but I think us as residents, I know I'm going to start getting the word out about people taking the survey. I know we just checked YouTube, and there's only like three or 4 people even watching it from the community right now. And so that's something that I would like to really push if we could. David, thank you for mentioning getting stuff out a little bit early, because then we can, I can get around town and talk to people about those topics and get feedback. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And please do. I mean, again, the dates are all set. So we've got these five meetings over 6 weeks starting tonight. So even if you don't have all the materials, you can definitely encourage people to attend these meetings via Zoom and be able to give input. And even more so to go online and use the online survey, and we'll be summarizing those results also.
And so is that the best way, just to let people know to get on the city's YouTube page and on those dates and times?
Yeah, well, the meeting is available as a Zoom link also. One can watch on YouTube, but that's not interactive. People who want to be interactive can, if they're not already on the mailing list, they can get onto the mailing list by contacting city staff or going to the Hollister2040.org website. There's a place there where you can sign up to get email alerts. And once you are on that email list, then you'll get Zoom links to the meetings so that you can participate in the meeting itself.
Awesome, thank you.
Was there 1 or 2 other questions did I hear? Okay. We do have a question in the chat, and I know Eva's typing an answer, but I'll just try and answer quickly. It was asked, will there be an in-person workshop? We are still, unfortunately, in the pandemic. Things are getting better all the time, but the city so far has not created policy about in-person workshops. I'm hopeful that at some point we will be able to do those. This project started really just as COVID got underway, and we haven't really had a chance to meet in person. I would welcome that, but it will require that the pandemic be lifted even further before we can do that. There was also a second question about whether there's been bilingual outreach, and the answer to that is yes. The entire website is available in Spanish. We have all our meeting materials in Spanish, and as I mentioned already, we are going to conduct a workshop on the items right now that we're seeing over these 5 meetings. There will be a Spanish language workshop as well. Okay, with that, I think we can probably move on. Is there any final questions? All right, so now I am going to go through all 8 items. If you do have questions about those items, maybe jot them down and I'll answer them at the end, and then we'll take public comments and questions on the 8 items as well. So the first of the items is Parks and Recreation. And one of the big issues facing us there is the amount of park land that is dedicated for parks by developers. The 2005 general plan established a park standard of 4 acres of park space per 1,000 residents, but the 2018 park facility master plan suggested 5 acres of park space per 1,000 residents instead. The current city ratio is only about 3.5 acres per 1,000 residents. And so we'll want you to give us guidance on what the right ratio there is. We'll also want you to look with us at increases in the number of parks and target improvements to facilities such as Vista Park Hill. So we're going to be looking at questions about which of these and these slides will come back up verbatim for you to look at. Which of the following parks policies and actions should be included in the general plan? Choose as many as desired, and you may well give us feedback that all 4 of these items should be included. The next item is new school funding, and the issue here that we've identified, and I want to point out that you do have a letter in today's packet from the San Benito School District stating that their school impact fees really are insufficient to construct new school facilities. Senate Bill 50 from the state limits the amount of impact fees that a jurisdiction can collect. It's capped at just over $1.50 per square foot of residential development. And most people will agree that that's really probably only 30 to 40%, maybe even less, of the amount of money you need to build a school to serve the students who are living in those residential units. So various communities have looked at other ways to find additional school funding, and we're going to ask for your guidance on what kinds of things we should do. And the options, and you could choose all of them or any combination, are listed here: a new school construction bond measure, incentives for developers to voluntarily provide additional funding, a specific plan requirement that would include voluntary funding as a precondition for development, or lobbying efforts to expand state funding. So you'll be giving us guidance on those this evening as well. We're going to be talking about farmland mitigation. In the farmland mitigation category, the CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, requires that you identify impacts to agricultural land that occur through development. Obviously, with Hollister largely surrounded by agricultural land, those impacts do occur when when residential development occurs. Typical agricultural mitigation requirements are either a 1-to-1 dedication, that is 1 acre of dedicated preserved ag land for every 1 acre developed, or even 2-to-1, 2 acres preserved for every 1 acre developed. So there are a number of issues here. There's the question of how much mitigation to require, what kind of farmland should be mitigated, and then who is going to do the mitigation as well. So we're going to be asking you all of those questions. Again, what is the right agricultural mitigation program ratio? What should be the city role? The types of agricultural land to be mitigated. We're going to be looking tonight at sensitive habitats. Right now, there are 2 very important sensitive habitats for 2 listed species, the California red-legged frog and the California tiger salamander, that occur primarily in this hatched area on the east side of town. That habitat and those 2 species are subject to federal, state, and local protections, but there is future residential development also planned in this area. So we're going to be wanting to hear from you what policies, if any, should the general plan include to limit or avoid impacts to the critical habitat for these two species. We're going to be looking tonight at heritage trees. Heritage trees provide several community benefits. They do protect against extreme temperatures. They increase the attractiveness of the city. Preserving them increases quality development. You do already have a municipal code with the street tree ordinance in it, but that looks at street trees only. And while the 2005 general plan promotes the preservation of significant trees, there's no definition of what constitutes a significant tree. There's no measures in place to actually ensure heritage tree or significant tree protection. So we want to find out from you. We did hear already, as we identified key issues, that perhaps this was an important issue. We're going to get guidance from you tonight on which of these policies should be included, if any, within the general plan. The next item is historic and cultural resources. We're going to be asking you to give guidance about historical preservation issues. You do already have 2 recognized historic districts in both the downtown and Monterey Street, and there's already 363 recognized non-archaeological cultural resources in and around the city. And of course, Hollister is, we all know, a very historic city, but that's a very high concentration of cultural resources that you do have. The 2005 general plan and the municipal code do include policy protection, but there's not a historic resources commission, and there's some other tools that could be put in place to further address historic resources. So we're going to ask you for guidance as to which of these items, if any, should be included in the general plan. It might be none, it might be all 5 of these, or it might be a subset of them. We'll also be talking about coordination with local tribes, that is Indian tribes. The state does require you to consult with local tribes on development projects to see if a project would impact tribal resources. We also are required by law, and we've already done so, to reach out to tribes as we prepare this general plan update. But we have heard already support for additional strengthened tribal coordination policies. So we have put together a list of options that you might look at here, and we're going to ask for your guidance this evening about any of these. It's really 4 items, or if number 5, if no additional policies or actions are needed. And then the last of the items that we'll be considering this evening is environmental justice. And as I already mentioned, there is relatively new state law went into effect under SB 1000 in 2018 that requires general plans to address environmental justice issues if a jurisdiction includes documented disadvantaged communities. In Hollister, you don't have a state-defined disadvantaged community, but I think we all know that there are pockets and neighborhoods within Hollisters that do have a concentration of people of color, people with various disadvantages in terms of language and economics, and people who do suffer from some environmental justice issues. So an environmental justice element by law is required to include access to affordable and nutritious food, bike and pedestrian safe streets, reducing exposure to pollution, equal access to public services and facilities, and promoting public participation. Even though you're not required to do this, we have heard from a number of members of the public that the general plan should include some of these issues as well. And so we've put together a list here of these 5 key issues that are identified in state law. And we want to hear from you if you would like us to go ahead and address all of them, or if there's any subset of these that you don't feel we need to address in this general plan update. That ends my presentation. At this point, we'll turn it over to the Gpac for questions, and then we will open it up for any public questions and comments. I'm going to stop sharing the screen at this point also so we can all see each other. But if there is a need to put a slide up, I'll put them back up during Q&A, and then I will put them up again once we get started in your discussion so you can all see the questions together. Any questions for you?
Mr. Early, as we're asking questions, do you want the commissioners to ask questions on all the topics, or did you want to go one by one?
I think we could take that as a suggestion to go ahead and do them one topic at a time. It might make things a little more straightforward. So let me just go back to my notes to make sure I do these in the right order. So the first topic was Parks and Recreation. Are there any questions on that?
Maybe I can start there because the city did adopt a new policy that made it 5 acres per thousand. The conversation at the time, we were trying to get to 7 acres per thousand. I think 7 acres is probably the direction we should be going in our community. So much land available. It's a good time to start planning for our future so we can interconnect our city through park trails. And I thought that was really important, and I would hope we can get there.
Okay. Thank you for that information. In terms of comments, like hoping we can go to 7, I would encourage you to wait on those until we do hear from the public as well. But I really appreciate that input. Any other questions about the Parks and Recreation issues?
So just a quick question.
Yeah.
We're going to go through each slide, and then we're going to be able to give our suggestions for each slide, for each question you have presented, right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay, perfect. I'll wait.
And that's the remainder of the meeting until whatever time it takes, hopefully before 8:30.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Any other questions either on overall process or Parks and Recreation?
So can I ask a question about Parks and Rec? So
Yeah.
any other type of open spaces, not counting agricultural spaces, is that also included in Parks and Recs?
I think the answer is probably essentially yes. Let me give you some examples. Included in that would be a town square or more urban kind of plaza or
Exactly.
downtown space. It would also include any sort of
Okay.
larger regional open space that some communities have at their edges. It would include publicly owned parts of the San Benito River or other facilities like that. And it is also up to a city to decide exactly which of those things to count or not. Some communities do count golf courses, for example, others do not. So there is some wiggle room on what one does or doesn't count. But in general, yes, it's all those types of parks and open spaces. You can even count privately held open space. For instance, if a developer develops a park and continues to maintain that park and makes it available to the public, but it's not part of the public park system, you could count that as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions on Parks and Recreation? Okay, I do want to point out in the chat, we got a question from Rob Rodriguez asking if we could stop this process and until in-person workshops can be held again. I would perhaps allow the mayor to respond to that as well, but initially I'll just say that we've heard pretty strong guidance from the mayor and the rest of the city council that it's really time that Hollister had a new general plan. There was just a meeting last week of the LAFCO, the Local Agency Formation Commission, where the mayor spoke about the fact that the general plan would be getting done over this next 1-year period or so, and the LAFCO was very happy to hear that. I feel very badly that we cannot do this with in-person meetings, and I would like the mayor to respond to that, but I think it would take direction from a majority of the city council at this point to slow down that process. Mr. Mayor, do you want to add anything in response to that question?
I think it's unfortunate that we are going through this, but this document is behind by several years. I think it really is up to us to really get the public involved through the Zoom meetings or through phone calls, participating online. I think we can get pretty close to the same results if we're all really making the effort to get more of the public interested. The world has changed. If you had asked me this question when we first started this COVID in February, March, it was a little different. But now I think most people have become Zoom literate, and we can get the participation we need. It's going to be a different world from now on. So I think we keep moving forward here.
And that this question was posted by Mr. Rodriguez, and I just say to him and to other members of the audience, we really would love to have more participation at these meetings, more participation with the online survey. So we'd encourage you to, I'd encourage you to really go out and talk to people and get more folks to attend. I think that would be really wonderful if that could happen. Okay, so
can I add something to that? Maybe a suggestion, just listen to what everybody had to say. Maybe if the city could set up some sort of space where things could be made public, people could go and check out maps of the plans that we're coming up with, or different things that we talk about, recaps. I know it's probably, not very easy to get all that stuff to print and out that fast, but
Yeah.
if something like that could be done where the community could have an open space that may, outside the vets building, during certain hours, you can go and view, what we have for the general plan, and that sort of thing, maybe just a suggestion.
Great. Well, we could look at that. Just to be clear, all of that information is available on the project website. That's not a physical space, it's an electronic space. But people, I hope that all the members of the audience that are here know about that website, hollister2040.org. We really encourage people to go look at that. And Mr. Evans, I think it's a very interesting idea to see if we could do some sort of display. I know indoor things are hard these days still with the pandemic still going, but it might be hard to make it an outdoor display and keep it out there. But maybe there is a larger open air space of some sort that still has some covering that we could make available for people to come and look at materials and then leave comments. We can certainly look at that with staff.
Well, and I'm wondering, I'm pretty sure that we're going to be starting up our farmers market pretty soon. And I'm wondering if we could utilize that venue in some way to help with not just encouraging people to participate, but also to get out information about what's happening at the meetings.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that because it was in our original scope of work that we would do several events at the farmers market. And those were intended mostly to be in the summer of 2020. And of course, there really was no outdoor farmers market in the summer of 2020. But it's great to hear that it is getting started again. And I think that is an opportunity for us to do some additional outreach. So we'll look into that. Okay, let's go on then. The next subject after Parks and Recreation is new school funding. Again, I want to remind you that you do have a letter from the San Benito School District with a lot of concern about these items. And I want to just ask any questions that you might have about new school funding. Okay, I don't hear any there, so we'll go on to the next item, farmland mitigation. Looks like no questions there. Sensitive habitats. I hear none. Heritage trees. Sounds like none there either. Next item is historic and cultural resources. Tribal coordination. And environmental justice. Any questions there? Okay, then I guess there were no questions on any of those items from the Gpac members. We'll come back to the Gpac and go through each of those 8 items again for guidance. Before we do that, we certainly want to hear from the public. We're now up to 7 public member attendees. If you would like to speak, and I think we'll do these one speaker at a time for all 8 items. So if you do have any of these 8 items you'd like to talk about, please raise your virtual hand and we will recognize you. I see no hands. I will mention that Carminder Brown did post in the Q&A what I would consider to be a public comment. She says, I want to encourage using the 2-to-1 mitigation ratio for farmland mitigation. We at the San Benito Agricultural Land Trust understand that 1-to-1 still means we lose half our farmland. Moving to 2-to-1 mitigation, we will conserve more farmland. She's also, so that's a comment she made. She did also post in the Q&A some suggestions about additional ways to do outreach, and we'll make a note of those and take those into account also. Is there anyone else who, is there anyone from the audience who would like to raise a hand to make an oral comment? Okay, I hear none. I see no hands raised. So in that case, we're ready to dive into the actual content discussion. I am going to once again share my screen. And this is always a little cumbersome. Hang on just a moment. Okay, so the first of the items is Parks and Recreation. And we have put together this list of 4 possible items that might be added to the current general plan. Parkland provisions by new developments and at that 5 acre per thousand ratio, using public accessibility, requiring public accessibility of any private parks or open space if they are to be counted towards that developer requirement, implementing the priorities that are in the parks master plan, and gap analysis of an existing parks, trails, and open space system. So we'll open it up for your comments as to which of those, if any, you feel should be included in the new general plan.
Mr. Chair, I do have some comments on Parks and Recreation.
Please.
Well, first I want to say is that thank goodness we have the Quimby Act, because I do believe that we need to ensure that we get funded for parks. My concern is that prior to determining what the ratio should be, my concern is ideally, yes, in an ideal world, I'd love to have a 7-to-1 ratio with 7 acres to 1,000 people. And one of the fondest memories I've had is pushing my daughter on the swing over at Dunn Park when we first moved here. And it recalls Wallace Stegner, a famous environmentalist, who said that, open space is like a geography of hope. And I can't underemphasize how important parks are to our community, but my concern is that I really strongly urge that we do have a gap analysis of our existing parks, because it's not just a matter of acquiring more land for parks. Is the question and concern that I have is that to make sure that these parks are adequately maintained. Accessibility, of course, accessibility is primary. And to prioritize and adhere to the recommendations of the City of Hollister Parks Master Plan, absolutely. But before we, again, acquire more land for parks, I'd like to see where we are with maintaining what we have. And those are my comments.
Great, thank you. Other comments?
So this would be the time where we would suggest what we want for the policies for Parks and Recs.
Yes, absolutely, Councilmember.
Okay. Yeah, I'm in favor. I think Los Baños has 7 acres per 1,000 students. You said we're at 3.8 right now for 1,000?
Yeah, that's your current, I think it's 3.5 as shown here on this slide.
Yeah, let's look at this really quick. So it looks like I know that, we're a bit behind and we can't justify that to get caught up, but let's put it into some perspective. Okay, so we were at 4, and then we had a meeting where it was jumped up to 5, and then the current park ratio is only 3.5 acres per 1,000. So we're not even meeting the 2005 general plan. So I do think that we need to be a little bit more progressive, and we need to advocate for more park space. Los Baños has 7 acres per 1,000 people, I think, and I think it's perfectly acceptable for us to do the same. So I definitely would be more in favor for getting 7 acres per 1,000. And then also, just looking at this list here, I think that the public should be able to access private parks and open space. Can you explain that to me a little bit more, number 2?
Yeah, well, private property is private property. So if a person wants to build a park-like setting on their private land and keep it private, they do have the right to do that. This item, though, is that in some cases, you might have a developer come forward and say, well, rather than dedicating land for a park, I'd like to build a private open space. I'll make that private open space available to people living in my development, but it won't necessarily be available to the broader public citywide. You can't tell them, no, you can't build that. If they want to build that as part of the development, they can, but you don't have to let them count that towards their Quimby Act requirement. So this policy would state that if you want to build a private open space as part of your development, and if you want it counted towards your Quimby Act requirement, you must make it publicly accessible in perpetuity, even if you retain title to it.
Absolutely, 100% behind that. We need to have access to those parks, and we should hold them accountable to that. So I would definitely support that policy. Thanks for explaining that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And excuse me, Dave.
Yeah.
Would the and you said the rivers would be included in that if rivers were considered parks and rec in the plan?
Yeah, I actually,
some
some of you may know this better than I do. I did mention that I don't actually know the ownership of the land under the San Benito River. To the extent it's owned by a public entity, you could be working towards making it more accessible, making it more of a recreational amenity, and ultimately being able to consider it as part of your parkland and open space inventory. But I'm sorry to say, maybe another staff person can fill us in. I don't actually know who owns the river.
Most of the river is owned privately. There is a section the city owns between Apricot and the 4th Street Bridge, just south of the 4th Street Bridge. The city owns that section, and that is it as far as the city's ownership.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for that.
And we just finished it. We just finished a trail along that river that we're having the ribbon cutting April 10th for all of you that want to come out for it.
Another thought, if I may.
Please.
Thank you. I did hear you mention that some communities count like golf courses as open space, and I would not be in favor of that. I think not everybody is gonna be able to utilize that space, and it's kind of so I would like to see more public open space that everybody can access, and I'd like to advocate for whenever there's developments to have as much as we can. Thank you.
All right, and I think in summary, what I'm hearing is that all of these 4 items are enjoying pretty broad support. If any of you wants to add anything, either relevant to these 4 items or any other items like the golf course issue that Councilmember Resendez just mentioned, now would be the time. Otherwise, we do have 8 items we can go on, and I think we're hearing we'll include all these 4 plus the items you've mentioned. And we'll research the way that we might get to 7 acres per thousand as well.
Mr. Early, if you can, maybe you can help us, help me understand something. One of the discussions we've been trying to get to is, and one of the reasons we talked about the 7 acres was, say alongside a development, you had a pathway for jogging or biking or different things. That is considered part of the parks plan if you're interconnecting within the city, correct?
Yes.
And that I think people didn't understand that they just assumed that it's all a park, and they didn't realize that without looking for more, we're never going to have that connectivity throughout the city, because that is part of the park system.
Great. Okay. So we've got a gap analysis here as number 4, but it sounds like you're also saying that we should be sure that the general plan reflects the idea of developing a master plan and realizing a master plan for a citywide trail system as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is a very useful discussion. It's exactly the kind of discussion we were hoping to have tonight. And if you're ready to, we can go on to the next item, but I don't want to cut the discussion short, but I'm also hearing a lot of consensus, in which case it's fine to move on whenever you're ready.
Dave, real quick, and you can keep it short. Do you have some examples of some other cities where PlaceWorks has done that sort of thing, where they've interconnected the city trails?
Yeah, we could make a note, Carrie and city staff, that we can try and post something to the website so people can see what an interconnected trail plan might look like. Let me say, just to be clear, it may well be outside of our scope for this general plan to do a trail master plan, but it's very much it can be an implementation item that once the general plan is adopted, a next study you can do is to develop a trail master plan. and we can give you some examples of what those look like.
Thank you.
Any other items before we go on? All right, I think then the next item is new school funding, and we have listed 4 items here. So let me just go over them one by one. Again, the issue here is that the legally capped dollars per square foot paid to support school construction is generally acknowledged to be inadequate to actually build the schools. And so the school districts need to find additional funds, and to some degree, they have to rely on local government, in this case, the city, to help them do that. So 4 relatively common items that you can pursue. Number 1 is a school construction bond measure. I'm not sure I have this history right, but I believe that the city some years ago passed 2 different bond measures in 2 different years. And more recently, in the last 5 years, I believe there was one that failed at the ballot. But that is a measure that the city can support. Obviously, the city government cannot force voters to vote in a certain way, but the city could work with the 2 school districts to put a bond measure on the ballot and hope that it's passed. The next 2 both have to do with the development community. Number 2 is to create incentives where a developer might, for instance, receive additional density, an additional density allowance, or be relieved from some other requirement if they provided additional school funding. That's number 2. Number 3 would actually be a little more resolute, and it would say that we're not going to actually redesignate any lands beyond those that are currently designated for residential development unless we have a voluntary specific plan prepared with the school funding as part of that specific plan. So that would really put the burden on the development community to create that plan and generate the funding, and the city would state in its general plan that it doesn't want, that it's actually by policy not going to redesignate other lands for development absent the developers coming up with that voluntary funding. And then the 4th item would be lobbying efforts to expand state funding for the public school system. And I should mention in number 5 is that there is state grant funds that are available for the construction of schools. Those generally don't totally cover the gaps either, but really we should have on this list of number 5 is to support school district attempts to get school construction grants from the state of California. So any of those 5 items, any and all of those 5 items could go in the general plan, and especially numbers 2 and 3 have the biggest impact on the development process. And so I'd like to hear specifically about your thoughts about those 2 that are either incentives for developers to hopefully provide additional funds, or actually requirement that no redesignation will occur unless we have a voluntary developer funding scheme. Questions or comments?
My comment, David, is on school funding is the most intriguing option to me is the zoning flexibility. But of all the options that were mentioned in the memo is there was parking, there was density, there was setbacks and building heights. I think the one that makes the most sense to me is the density option.
Okay, so that just for everybody's record keeping, you're talking about item number 2 on this list.
Item number 2, right.
Yeah, item number 2 makes the most sense to you, and particularly allowing increases in density.
The school bonds, just borrowing more money. I'm a little wary about that.
Mm-hmm. And Commissioner Huber, are you willing to, I noticed that you didn't speak to number 3. Do you think that that is too much? Would you not support number 3 as?
Yeah, I am somewhat supportive of it. I'd like to hear what the other Gpac members have to say about number 3. A specific plan that would restrict residential development unless there is definite contributions to the school. I would be, on the face of it, I would say yes. But
I can chime in.
That one I'm still.
Go ahead, Mr. Resendez, and then I'll chime in.
Yeah. So Councilmember Resendez next. Is that right?
Thank you. So compared to most of you here, I'm fairly new. I've been on the council for 2 years, but I know some of you have been involved way longer than that. And just looking at this list, I think a lot of them have not worked or haven't really happened. The last couple years I've been on the intergovernmental committee, I did push to get like a specific plan that includes voluntary developer funding as a precondition for development. The planning staff can talk to you about that. Abraham, I think, was involved in that. And I just don't think that anything else is really working much for us. The community is completely tapped out on bonds. Incentives to voluntarily provide additional school funding, like that's just not going to happen. I'm sorry. I don't see it happening. Lobbying efforts, I mean, that's good, but it's not a guarantee. It looks like the only for sure one of these is number 3. So I'm in favor, of course, of all of them. They're all options, but more specifically, number 3 would be something that I think is definitely needs to be included. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that.
To also comment on what Roland said is number 3 definitely is more etched more clearly on yes. I mean, we're going to say that we're going to restrict this residential development through this specific plan, and that will certainly is a clear mechanism, a leverage of getting contributions to the school. But as a planning commissioner and as an architect, I think the incentive also is definitely worth considering.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mr. Early, do you have any examples out there of CFDs for school districts on the new homes?
Yeah, those exist. I mean, those are one of the ways that the funds can actually be collected. So a CFD, for everyone's reference, is a community facilities district. And a community facilities district has to be put in place by a vote of the people who own the land within the district. Once you have a bunch of houses in place with lots of families living in them, it's very difficult to get the necessary vote to put that in place. But a developer who owns all the land all at once is the only voter in that kind of scenario before they've gone to build and sell houses. So it's quite easy for them, if they want to put the CFD in place, then they can do so. The problem there is that if it's, the CFD then can require the future homeowners to pay those funds rather than them being paid by the development community when the development occurs. That does increase the cost to live in the house. It essentially, a savvy buyer will think of that as part of their monthly payment on their housing if they have to pay an additional CFD payment as well. So one might argue that if the developer has paid the fees in advance, they'll pass that on to the home buyer as well. And that's probably true, but that's at least, it's sort of a one-stop payment. You buy the house, you know what you've paid, you're done with it. Some people perhaps would prefer to pay it over time as a homeowner, but it's a little harder for some buyers to understand that they're going to have to pay this sometimes relatively large monthly or annual fee as part of their property tax bill because they're in a CFD. So, but that's another option that's not on this list. It could be that the developer either does the pre-funding or puts a CFD in place before selling the homes.
Right. This is a conversation we've had in the past, but there wasn't support. Some felt it wasn't fair to developers. Now, the current issue we have, if you looked at anybody's tax bill here, is there's several already bond issues. The public's tired of it. And the reality is the impact fees don't even cover a third of the cost of a new school. So something drastic needs to happen to make this thing work if we're going to continue. I do like item 3. Partial from the development, and hopefully we can get to CFDs, because it's just not fair any longer to keep asking. I think there's 5 or 6 bonds currently on the tax bill. So the public is pretty much fed up. Lobbying efforts, we keep getting promises from the state and nothing really seems to materialize other than a few million here and there. But it's out of reach now to pay for the new schools with the money we're receiving currently.
Yeah, this is Larry, Rebecca. I think the public is overtaxed. And I think that's why the high school bond issue last year failed. And there are other reasons. The school is just too large. We need another high school. And it's in a terrible location. You know, the traffic is terrible getting students to school at the high school. And I think the high school needs to think about creating a second campus. And that's item 2. Item 3, I think there's a lot of bitter feelings about the developers not actually contributing their share as far as building new schools. And I don't know all the details, but you hear a lot of rumors around town. For example, the Santana Ranch School originally was supposed to be built by the developers. And then it came down, no, they're just going to give you the land. And I hear ultimately, they didn't even give the land. The district had to pay for the land. So there's a lot of talk out there in the community. I don't know the validity of it, but like the mayor says, people are taxed, overtaxed, actually. There are too many bond issues. And then the third item there, I think the developers have to contribute more. I mean, they're making money. They're making money. Okay.
So I wanted to ask a question about item number 3, actually. So it kind of, I think, Mr. Early, you alluded to this a little bit in your comment earlier, but so one quick clarification just for me, just because I just want to be crystal clear about this. When we're talking about development for number 3, we're talking about housing development, right? It's
right.
not other types of development.
That's correct. I mean, it's not impossible or illegal to put the same kind of condition on redesignation of land from agricultural, say, to industrial. But very few communities do that. There's not a direct connection between a job generating use and school demand, because you don't know for sure that people working in those units, working in those places are actually living in the town. And if they are living in the town, obviously they're living in a residence and might have paid the fee already. So while it's not impossible to put a fee like that on non-residential development, our intention here was to limit it to residential.
So I think that, well, I mean, I could argue that there is a direct connection because they're in our community. They are benefiting from being in our community. So right. So that I would argue the other way, even whether they live here or not, they're benefiting from the community, and they're probably making money and earning a living from our community. And the reason I ask that question is because I worry about what you said earlier, is that all of any kind of fees that are added onto developers are just going to be passed on to the homeowner. And as it is, housing prices are so high, and we're trying to encourage, moderate or low income types of housing projects, and we just have a harder and harder time doing that because costs are so high. So that's the thing that I worry about. Although I do agree that developers should pay their fair share, I'm pretty sure, and I mean, just to be realistic about this, they are passing those costs on to whoever is purchasing that property. So that's my worry about that. So I think that if we are going to do anything with number 3, we have to look at this as we look at the housing component of the general plan, to make sure that we aren't sending a mixed message by having some kind of requirement in the school funding piece and then trying to accomplish something different in the housing piece. So I just want to make sure that we're looking at those two issues together. Although I do think that it's something for us to consider as, a Gpac. And then in terms of number 2, I agree with Mr. Hoopoy that we should at least consider some of these incentives, see if it's possible. I hear Mr. Resendez's concerns, because I do agree that a lot of these things have not worked, but I don't think that we should take it off the table totally, not yet. I think we should at least consider what are some of the options. And then my question about number 4 was, and maybe Mayor Velasquez can answer this as well. The lobbying efforts in the past, have they been specifically for Hollister schools, or have they been in general for public schools in California? So can somebody answer that question for me?
Yeah, the school districts here locally have lobbied, try to get more funding to build the school, some of the schools that are under construction and some of the future schools. So the school districts are the ones that have to lobby for it, since they are the ones that collect the funds from the impact fees, and it goes from the state to the school districts. It's their own agency. But yes, they have lobbied
And-
directly, try to get more help because
And-
we're so far behind in our community as far as funding for schools.
Okay, that's all I had.
Question.
right.
I have a question, Mayor. You could probably answer for us. Do you believe that because there's so many different districts within our county that it's hard to get significant funding from the state? If it was, if we were consolidated into one district, would that increase our chances of funds?
No, this is a statewide issue. The dollars are just not there throughout the state. I just get a quick number understanding. I give you it's 2,000 homes is the equivalent of having to build a new school, and those 2,000 homes bring about $15 million, $12 to $15 million in impact fees. A new school, K through 8, costs between 50 and 60 million. So you could see the problem right there. And the state is trying to pass some bonds to provide more funding, but at this point, we just haven't received it.
David, going back to what Roxanne was stating about the developers paying the impact fees and now additional fees for the school funding and then passing it on to the homeowners. I'm concerned about, going back to our housing element, the disparity that we have with affordable, or also known as workforce housing. We may condition that density bonus to affordable units.
Right, yeah. I was going to mention that certainly if you do want to pursue number 3 on this list, that the affordable units, those that, for instance, meet the legal definition of very low income or low income, could be exempted from payment of an excess fee or even of any fee for the schools. That it's sort of, it goes both ways. Then you lessen the total amount of money you collect, but you don't further burden the affordable units, and you only burden those units that are selling at moderate and above moderate income costs.
One clarification I do want to make. I heard the comment about developers pass it to the customer. The developer sells a home based on the market rate, and I've been in this industry for 30 years. I can tell you when they're cleaning up, they'll take all the money they can get, and they're not going to give 1 penny more or 1 penny less. So it's not really about the cost as it is about the market. And right now, the market is very hot for them, and they are doing very well. There's times where the market's not that great, and that's when, as we've seen in the past, nothing gets built. So the developers don't intentionally tack on to the dollar amount of the home. That's based completely on the market, what their prices are selling for.
One point, if I can make.
Go ahead.
I think we've got to be real careful about how we define affordable, because lately we've been hearing like it's affordable by design, but it doesn't really meet the criteria of what affordable should be for, let's say, the everyday working class citizen or teachers and that type of thing, especially because the market is so inflated right now. So if we're going to include that language, I just want to make sure that we specify what affordable means.
Yeah, and we're not preparing your new housing element right now. You don't have a housing allocation yet from the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments, AMBAG, but that'll be something you do shortly after the general plan is adopted, and you will be required to use the state mandated affordability categories, which I think many of you know. It's very low income is considered 50% of the area median income, 50% or less. Low income is anywhere between 50 and 80%. Moderate income is from 80 to 120% of your area median income. And market rate units are 120% or more of the area median income. All right, I want to just do a time check. We're at just about 7:30. We've gotten through 2 items in half an hour. The first one went more quickly. I do think that this school funding item is one of the most policy deep ones on our list. But it would be great if we could move on to the next one. I think we have lots of good comment here. I think we will include all 4 of these items in the general plan, and even the other 2 we mentioned, namely having a community facilities district as a possibility, and also state grant funding and helping the school districts to apply for state grant funding. But we will include a requirement of some sort that for at least market rate and moderate income housing units, that developers do need to find a way to help offset that funding shortfall before they can have land redesignated. Any further comments on that before we go on? Okay, then we will go on to farmland mitigation. We have a series of questions here. The first one is, well, let me just go over them all. The first one is, should we establish a program, and if so, what would be the ratio? Secondly, what should be the city's formal role in this process? And third, what are the types of agricultural land that need to be mitigated? So if one of you wants to speak to all 3 of those, you could do so, or if you prefer to do them one at a time, that's fine also.
Well, I like to say is that we're limited geographically with the farmland that we have left. There's very little farmland within the city limits. There's some outside, east of 25 within the planning boundary, and that's outside the sphere of influence, I believe, and south of Wright Road. So given that we don't have that much agricultural land in the city of Hollister, it makes it, to me, that much more valuable. But then again, I think that I'm also concerned about landowners that have owned their land for a long time, farmers. And I'm a little concerned about they're looking at the long picture, their family members, their generations to come, that, they're actually, what we're looking at, we're telling them, we're pretty much, you got to forfeit some of your developing rights for some of your land because you have to preserve it to an agricultural perpetuity. So I'm caught in the middle of that, but if I had to pick a ratio today, I would go with the 1-to-1 ratio. But there are some concerns that I have that I stated.
Let me just answer a couple points there. I have not assumed that the mitigation would have to occur inside the city limits. It's an interesting question of how far out could you go? Could you go to Gilroy or Santa Clara County or southern San Benito County? I think we probably do need to look at exactly what areas mitigation can occur in. But I think certainly I would have thought anywhere within the designated planning area would be sufficient. And I would also think that I think it's really necessary that the place where mitigation occurs has to be through a willing seller, a person who is willing to sell their development rights and commit to staying in agriculture in perpetuity. So if there's a farmer who does desire that at some point in the future he might be able to develop his or her land, that person probably wouldn't sell the development rights, and the developer would have to look elsewhere. I know that you do have an agricultural land trust already, and it is the next question is whether the city should perhaps assign those management responsibilities, such as acquiring the land and making sure that they are adequately preserved. Those might be assigned to a conservation organization like the Agricultural Land Trust instead of the city trying to go out and find those.
Open the window.
My comment on it would be the 2-to-1 ratio and number 2, working with a conservation organization.
I also support the 2-to-1, and then I would support number 1, enforcement and management agency.
How about the rest of you? We're hearing differing opinions. We've heard both 1-to-1 and 2-to-1, and we've heard both enforcement and management agency and enforcement agency only. So we'll need to hear from some of the rest of you to get some guidance.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh.
Sorry.
Okay, let me try to make this really quick. Mr. Evans, like I'm gonna try to make this really quick. So here's the thing that I'm a little not sure about the ratio, only because I'm trying to get a picture of what that actually means in land. And it's really hard for me to get that because I had the same thought that Mr. Hugo had earlier about we don't have a ton of that left if we're looking just at the, at the SOI. It's not, it doesn't seem as much as if you were looking, for example, at the whole county. So I guess for me, I'm having trouble trying to visualize what would be the difference between a 2-to-1 and a 1-to-1. So that's my first comment. Maybe you can answer that. And then secondly, I would also be in favor of 1 and 2.
Can you choose 1 or 2? Because they are different. And we've had comments in favor of both of them.
Mr. Early, maybe let me make a real quick comment on that, because I think I understand a conservation group organization that has they're working with not only the city, but maybe working with the county, and they're probably better connected to the landowners where the city would not be so connected with some of the different people that are willing to buy the 2 or sell the 2, whatever the end result is. And the enforcement agency would, in this case, be the city, but they'd be working with the conservation group, the nonprofit group, to make sure it's all happening.
So I guess I kind of had that, and that's why I said 1 and 2, but I get that I misread that. So I would support number 2.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that. And let me mention that Carminder Brown, who's in attendance via Zoom tonight and works with the Agricultural Land Trust, she put in the Q&A a thank you to me for having explained some of these items. It is there are many communities where it is an agricultural land trust that does the conservation and management work. So I think that is a possibility here. And she did also confirm that the land trust wouldn't necessarily assume that it's within the city limit or even the sphere of influence. She didn't write this, but I'm guessing that something like the planning area might be the right boundary for that. And there's certainly plenty of land to look at conserving, even at a 2-to-1 ratio, if you look at the planning area as a whole.
So, yeah, just chiming in here. I kind of, I want to say that the 2-to-1 ratio is something that, that I would like to see preserved in Hollister. But then I going back to what David was saying, oh boy, having some concerns. I'm thinking back to, trying to get that parks and recs. We want to increase the acreage of parks and recs. And are we kind of running out of space to even have sensible growth in other areas if we do a 2-to-1 ratio?
No, I can assure you, you're not going to run out of land from those 2 requirements. The 7 acres per 1,000 residents. I mean, I haven't done this math. I don't know if I can do it off the top of my head, but if you've got about an average of 3 people in a housing unit, obviously 1,000 people live in 330 units or so. Those 330 units might take close, not maybe a full 100 acres, but 60 or 70 acres of land to be built. And you're looking at taking 7 acres perhaps on top of that. So there you're looking at 7 out of 70 or 100 acres. And that would be inside the city. That's certainly attainable. And then this ratio of 2-to-1 or 1-to-1, you're looking at mitigating agricultural land well outside the city limits beyond the development areas. So it's really very different land. And there is a supply of that land. And at the same time, the idea is to ensure that land is kept in agricultural in perpetuity and does not become developed. And hence, ultimately, you have an agricultural ring around the city, or a green buffer, if you will, that is retained in agriculture.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with the mayor. I like, having a 2-to-1 ratio. And number 2, enforcement agency, but then, using organizations like the Land Trust and leaning on our nonprofits to give assist to the city and those agencies, I think is huge. So I like number 2 there for the city role.
Okay. There was one of you who did suggest the 1-to-1 ratio, or maybe even 2 of you. Have you at all? I think I've heard more people saying 2-to-1, and that's why I'm moving in that direction. But I'm just curious if those of you who did speak in favor of 1-to-1 want to say more about it, or any of you who haven't spoken want to chime in one way or the other.
Hi, David. This is Carol Johnson, and
Hi,
I would
Carol.
support the 2-to-1 ratio,
Okay,
and then the number 2 also
great. Thank
with the
you.
land trust.
Excellent. Yeah, so I think that's what I'm hearing is a 2-to-1 ratio, and having number 2, that the city does enforce this regulation, but assigns management responsibilities to an outside organization. Is that, I know that wasn't what some of you started with. Is that acceptable to all of you?
Absolutely.
Does
Yeah.
it make sense to, before I chime in on the 2-to-1, is to make sense on the actual geographical area of this agricultural land that we're referring to? I mean, if it's a small farm or a large.
Right. Well, that actually is a good segue to the last question here, which is on this next slide. What are the types of agricultural land that you do feel like need to be mitigated, where the loss is being mitigated? And this, you can extend this question to, are there priorities for the types of land that would be preserved? Commissioner Huboy, I think you're saying maybe it makes sense to focus the preservation on smaller farms as opposed to large farms. Here we're asking, is it the loss of designated prime land or unique farmland of statewide importance? Is it any existing crop farming operation? Does rangeland require mitigation? Is it anything with an agricultural land use designation? It's kind of down in the weeds, and it's something we can certainly work on with staff. But if you all have opinions about it, we'd be happy to hear about them.
I definitely want to make sure we're preserving the prime farmland.
So that at the very least, right?
Yeah, at the very least, because that one, we lose it and it's gone forever.
Yes, definitely prime farmland.
Okay. Any other comments there? Okay, I think I'm watching the time too. We probably should move on. As I close, let me just mention that Carminda Brown, again, who's in the audience and from the Ag Trust, she mentioned that the county has recently pursued funding to develop a countywide habitat conservation plan, or HCP. And if the county receives that funding and then that's established, the city might partner there, and it could help to facilitate ag land mitigation. So that's something that we can explore some more with the county. We've been having some really great staff level meetings with county staff, and we can make sure to reflect that in this general plan as well.
I totally agree with that. With collaboration with the county.
Great. All right, unless there's anything else, we'll move on. The next item, there we go. Our sensitive habitats, and again, we're really looking at this eastern area of town where there is critical habitat for both the California red-legged frog and the tiger salamander. We want to find out from you if you want to go so far as to prohibit development within all critical habitat areas and including a buffer area around them. If you would only, you probably are only going to choose one of these. Would you prohibit development within the critical habitat areas but without a buffer? Would you prohibit development only in areas known to have tiger salamanders or frogs? Or would you have no policy and leave that up to mitigation through individual projects as they come forward and they go through the CEQA process?
I noticed, David, that 1, 2, and 3, the first word is prohibit. I know that with environmental regulations that are on the books today, that you can restrict development, providing you go through these procedures, hire a biologist, do a recon, and all these surveys and everything that would be required. I guess restriction is then off the table of discussion tonight.
Well, if you want to define restriction a little further, we can certainly include that instead. But the process you just said could, I mean, maybe it's a number 4 and a different kind of number 4, but those restrictions where you hire a biologist, they do some assessments. If they then find no frogs and no salamanders, even though you're in the critical habitat, the development might proceed. You could also have, and this is not on the list, but could be that you do a mitigation process just like the ag land we talked about, where you allow, if a piece of land that has that habitat is proposed for development, that can move forward provided that they mitigate by purchasing land somewhere else. So those things are possible, but in my mind, at least, the fundamental question is, are you going to try and preserve some set of lands that do provide habitat for these species? Is it going to be your policy to always preserve them, or are you going to allow that to move forward, allow development to move forward as long as there is what's found to be adequate mitigation?
Mr. Early, I have a question for you.
Please.
1 and 3 prohibit the development of critical habitat areas, and 3 development where California tiger salamanders and red-legged frogs. Is 1 include those 2 items, or it just includes more?
Well, 1, 2, and 3 are progressively less restrictive. So number 3 is the smallest area. That's the place where there's actually documented salamanders or frogs.
Gotcha.
You send a biologist out, you find them on site. They're not always in the same place every year. You go out and find them, or you don't find them on a development site, and then you can move forward, even if it's in a critical habitat area. Number 2 says it doesn't matter if the species is there at the time the biologist goes out, but if it's designated as a critical habitat area, the city at least will not allow it to be developed. And then number 1 says, not only are we going to avoid that critical habitat area, but we're even going to put a buffer around that area so that development doesn't encroach on it and possibly lessen the value of the habitat area itself.
I would be in favor of number 1.
I would also be in favor of number 1.
I am in favor of number 1 as well.
So am I, and then I have a follow-up question. So then, in your explanation to the mayor, or in his answer to his question, did you mean that these critical habitats have already been identified?
Yeah, so there is a map, and Carrie may be able to give us some additional information here, but it's essentially this entire hatched area. So it's quite an extensive area east of Fairview. Some development has already occurred in this area, obviously, Santana Ranch among others. Part of it is already designated for development by the city. There is actually law in the books that if you want to remove that designation, we're going to have to help you find other areas that you can replace it, because under SB 330, you can't lessen the total land area available for development. And Carrie, do you know, or does city staff know? I'm not sure if this entire area is all mapped critical habitat, or if there are islands within it that are and are not.
And that's in the county there you're pointing out.
That's in the county, although it's in the city's planning area, and although it's not in the sphere, right?
So I just want to make sure that I understand. So then we are if we go with number 1, then we are assuming that there aren't any other habitats anywhere else, that we're just really talking about this part of the planning scope.
Well, that's an interesting question, and I guess we probably should temper that. This is currently the only identified critical habitat. Critical habitat is a technical term. It's a legal term, capital C, capital H. The U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife has gone out, or U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has gone out and actually assessed the area and found that it legally qualifies as critical habitat. That has not occurred anywhere else in or around the city. I suppose it's possible that it could occur in the future, and it's also possible that there is habitat for red-legged frogs and or salamanders in other parts of the city or around the city, even though they're not legally identified as critical habitat. So we've been focusing on this already identified critical habitat that I'm pointing to with my cursor, but we certainly could expand that to any areas that are either designated in the future or that are where a biological survey finds that there is habitat for those species.
Question, Dave, could parks be developed around those buffer areas?
You could certainly allow, I mean, again, this would be, there are various people who feel various things about that, but it would be possible to have a park within that buffer area. Some biologists might say that that lessens their value, but others would say that that's a perfectly fine use for a buffer area.
Yeah, I mean, you go to Monterey or even Wattsville, the beach, anywhere, and they have parks there set up to go and view different species.
Yeah. Right.
Would that
so we can certainly allow that. There's no clear consensus in the scientific community that that would be a bad thing to do.
Okay, so I will be in support of number 1.
Okay.
David, I have another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is Carol. Has any of this information been discussed with the county planning department or with their general plan? Do we have any idea what they're looking at?
We have not, I mentioned that we've had some very productive meetings with county staff. We have not specifically brought up this item. It is the case that the county's general plan does designate these lands for development. And honestly, it was kind of surprising to me when I realized that that the designation of critical habitat exists and that those county projects had moved forward. Obviously the county didn't break the law. The county found a way to either avoid impacts or mitigate those impacts, but they have allowed development in those already designated areas within the critical habitat area. And honestly, the city can't stop them from doing that. We will be talking at a future meeting about provision of sewer service in those areas because the county doesn't have a way to provide sewer service on its own. So the city could also, and I think logically would, if you decide you don't want development in these areas, you probably also would not extend sewer service into those areas on behalf of the county. So the city cannot stop the county from approving development, but the city does have some control because the city is the body that needs to agree to extend the sewer service.
But David, when the county does allow development in those critical habitat areas, that's still subject to approval from the U.S. Wildlife Fish and Game, right?
That's correct. And Carminder, who knows a lot of these things, just posted in the chat that the Santana Ranch project created a mitigation bank that preserved the habitat for the 2 species in other places off-site. That's how they dealt with it.
And they did get approval then from the...
They did get approval. So yes, so this goes back to the very original question, your original question. Do we have to prohibit development? Could we allow it and mitigate elsewhere? And the answer is certainly yes to that. And that's not on our list. I apologize for that, but that would be a 5th option, is to not prohibit development, but require off-site mitigation. But that said, Commissioner Huber, I think you've perhaps been in favor of, or spoken somewhat in favor of off-site mitigation, but it sounds like many members of the Gpac are saying they would want to prohibit development within that critical habitat area and even a buffer around it as in number 1.
Well, with I'll go with it. I'm leaning towards number 2.
Okay.
I do know that if you're proposing any development in the critical habitat area, and believe me, I'm totally in favor of preserving our sensitive habitats, believe me. But realistically, I know what the developer has to go forward. If there's some compelling reason that he wants to develop within this critical zone, that it's not an easy process. It's a very extensive procedure that he has to go through. So tonight, if I had to pick one, I'll pick number 2.
Okay. So it sounds like we certainly have a consensus for somewhere between 1 and 2. Many of the members have spoken in favor of number 1. You've spoken in favor of number 2, and the difference there is whether you require a buffer area around it or not. So that can be an open question still when we go further to the Planning Commission and City Council, but I think we'll work for now with that range of number 1 or 2. Any other comments before we move on? We're picking up on time, and I think we're at about a pace that we will be done just before 8:30 if we keep going at about this rate. Any items before we move on? Okay, hearing none. The next item is heritage trees. The city does have a tree ordinance. It has general plan policies promoting the preservation of significant trees, but no real definition of what that means and no measures to ensure heritage tree protection. So this list is here. There's really only 3 items on it and a 4th item to add no policies. Would you like us to include additional policies in the general plan update, including a definition of a heritage tree, specifying requirements for removal, pruning, and trimming of heritage trees, and identifying heritage tree protection measures during construction?
I for one, would be in favor of identifying what these heritage trees, the species that we're talking about. The reason being is that when I go to St. Luke's Church on 7th and Monterey, there's trees there that are uprooting the sidewalk. They're dropping all kinds of debris. They're not all that attractive. And I love trees generally speaking, but I'm not sure what species trees those are. I certainly would like to, I know they're large, but.
Right. So it sounds like you're saying that
going for them is they're big.
maybe you do want some of these policies identified in 1, 2, and 3, but you would also want a clear listing of what a heritage tree is. And you might even want some leeway that if a tree, whether a heritage tree or not, is causing damage to city infrastructure, sidewalks, streets, that it may actually be necessary to remove it. So it's not an absolute prohibition. It's just that you really need to carefully consider before you go and remove or change a heritage tree.
Correct. I agree with that. We need to have a clear definition of what a heritage tree is.
Yeah.
I would agree with Mr. Huboy on that.
So I know that Anita Kane is in the audience. If she can stay and hang out towards hopefully Anita, she's a landscape architect and she might be able to provide some clarity on that. And also on the next item, as far as like the Historical Society. So I don't know either, but I definitely am in favor of it. And maybe Anita can provide some insight on that.
Yeah, Anita did just type in the chat, "Hi, Roland," so she hears you. I don't think we're going to open it up for further public comment now orally, but Anita, if you do want to type anything in the chat, or maybe staff or our team can call you to discuss some of your ideas about what a heritage tree would really be in Hollister, we can talk to you later to get some feedback on that.
I know Anita personally, and by all means, she's a great landscape architect. Certainly value her opinion on that.
Yeah. And yet chat is disabled in this meeting. If you're a Zoom aficionado, you can't use chat. You can use the Q&A to chat us if you'd like. So Anita and others, you can type there, or as I said, if we don't hear anything from you in the chat tonight, we'll make a point to call you in the next days or weeks to get some guidance from you. Any other comments on the heritage trees? It sounds like we'll move forward with all of these and include a clear definition of the species that can be heritage trees, some of the things that the physical characteristics that make them heritage trees, and we're not making a blanket prohibition on ever removing one. There would be characteristics or situations in which even a heritage tree might need to be removed.
I think we need to include replanting also. If you're going to be removing, I think
Then
you need to, yeah.
Agree. Yeah,
Okay,
I agree
so
with
we'll
that.
add
I mean, the comment I was gonna make is that if there is an issue, if a tree is creating a structural issue or some other issue, then there should be we should take every action that we can that's reasonable to remove it and replant it. So I think that having the number 2 and number 3, then we'll have the opportunity to include that in whatever policy we create.
Great. Okay. And Anita just did type further in the Q&A. She says, as a landscape architect, it's maddening to want to save a great tree, but have no teeth in an ordinance. So I think she's not giving us the detail there that we might get from her moving forward, but she's certainly supporting the idea that the general plan should include these regulations that might then even be turned into an ordinance once the general plan is complete. Okay, anything else on heritage trees before we move on? I'm pleased to report that we really have picked up on time here. That's a great thing. And Anita does say she's happy to give more information later, so we'll definitely contact you, Anita. Thank you. Let's go on and talk about historic and cultural resources. We've got a couple of additional items. Obviously, you do already have the 2 historic districts. There's a lot of historic resources identified in town, but here are some possible additional measures that might be included, and we want any opinions you have about each of these. Forming an historic resources commission. Generally speaking, such a commission would be charged with reviewing any changes and particularly demolition of an identified historic resource, possibly either in addition to that or instead. Number 2 is to require consultation regarding these historic resources with the San Benito County Historical Society before demolition or alterations occur, establishing incentives for property owners to preserve historic and cultural resources, creating a comprehensive inventory to go beyond the 300 some odd that are already identified, and public education about historic and cultural resources. Any comments on any of these?
That would be for all 5. I'm very, very adamant, and I have strong passion for our architectural historic heritage of buildings that we have. I know Juan Batista had a historic resources commission. I don't know if that body is still active, but and I also want to emphasize that incentives that's a great proponent for and a leverage for ensuring that we do the right thing regarding our historic heritage of buildings.
I agree. I think we have too many these beautiful historical structures, and it's always a shame to see somebody destroy it to build something that's just as more modern, rather than restore it. So I'm completely in agreement.
I too 100% agree with both the previous speakers. Again, Anita Kane is involved in the San Benito County Historical Society. I mean, we just created an Arts and Culture Commission through the city. If we were to create a Historic Resource Commission through the city, and we can have the Historical Society peoples sit as commissioners, then that would merge 1 and 2, because I don't feel comfortable or confident enough just to have them consult with the Historical Society. I'd rather have them sit as commissioners and enact policy that we can then would have some teeth to protect those beautiful buildings and monuments that we're talking about. So very much in favor with both of the previous speakers. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Anita, as you know, is here, and she is obviously a member of the Historical Society, and she wrote into the chat, the Historical Society is willing to work with the city on a Historic Resources Commission, much needed. Yeah, and I just want to speak to what someone else just said. I'm a little worried as your consultant about having both number 1 and number 2. I think if you do form a commission, that's probably the right place to have any formal action. The idea of having Historical Society members on the commission is certainly a good one, but requiring both, going through a Historic Resources Commission and a formal consultation with the Historical Society might be sort of double jeopardy for a property owner who's wanting to do something. But having at least one of those, I think, is a very strong idea, and I think it's obvious. I think it's a stronger notion to have a city commission than to just work with the private body. So I would encourage you to have number 1, and then let's do number 2 as members of the Historical Society may well be those who help to populate that commission.
I agree.
I agree as well.
So I agree as well. And I also have a question about the way that the 5 items are worded. because it speaks to what is in existence already, or it speaks to our history. But I'm wondering, it is especially in the cultural resources part of the history and cultural resource title. Are we also interested in developing more cultural resources in this part of the general plan, or is that belong somewhere else?
The answer to your question is it will be covered somewhere else. We'll have another meeting about arts and cultural facilities. It's very confusing because in the planning world, the term cultural resources is used to apply to other types of historic and archaeological resources. So cultural resources in this context is a catch-all that includes both historic resources that are things that come from historical times, as well as archaeological or prehistoric resources that come from times that are earlier than historic times. Those collectively are called cultural resources. And it is very confusing because we also use that same word cultural resource to talk about a theater or an art gallery or something like that. Those things, also cultural resources, but a different meaning of the word, will be covered at Gpac meeting number 4.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll include all of these 1 through 5. We'll kind of merge 1 and 2. Anita Kane mentioned in the Q&A again that 3, 4, and 5 are all very important also. And I've certainly heard that from all of you too. So we'll include all of these items.
Great.
All right, are there any other comments before we go on? Hearing none, we're now on to coordination with local tribes. As I mentioned, state law also already requires consultation both in the preparation of this general plan and also in consultation with regarding individual development projects. And the question here is, do you want us to go further than that? So some possible general plan policies would be just acknowledging the importance of tribal cultural resources, identifying steps to reserve those resources, supporting the tribal consultation process, requiring pre-construction investigation to find any potential tribal cultural resources. Those are 4 items that could all be added to the general plan.
I think I'd like to comment on that. Generally speaking, tribal cultural resources they need to be brought more into the forefront and to the forum. That somehow, a lot of times, some of these development projects that in the past, they just totally ignore tribal cultural resources. I think it's deplorable, really.
So it sounds, Commissioner Huboy, like you'd be in favor of all 4 of these, is that
Yes.
right? And I think implicit in your comment was maybe one we missed on this, but that if there have been tribal cultural resources and they are being in any way displaced or affected, that some interpretation for the public, an acknowledgement of them, inclusion in a development area so that people know what was there and perhaps even is still there would be important as well.
Absolutely.
Any other comments on this?
And so, David, I mean, these last couple of things we've talked about, I imagine we're going to get into this further, but I mean, these are all great opportunities to coordinate, and I mean, with Parks and Recs, and I mean, is that kind of something we can talk about more later, or?
Well, the general plan, as I mentioned in my opening comments, is a policy document that guides the city as a whole in regard to the entire body of development, conservation, and services. So to the extent that the Parks and Rec Department might implement some of these policies, staff will certainly, they'll talk among themselves and make sure that this isn't just planning's document, but that other departments like Parks and Rec are working here. And so as we move forward with your guidance to develop the actual general plan policies, yes, we will work with, for instance, Parks and Rec staff to make sure that we're developing policies and actions that they too can implement.
Awesome.
Mr. Early, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I remember earlier we said that we were going to reach out to the local tribes did that ever take part at all?
Yes, we have done that, and I'm probably a little fuzzy on exactly what we did. I'm hoping that Carrie or Amber or Eva knows the exact status of that outreach.
Ms. Johnson could help us with this also. She's well connected to some of the local tribes.
Okay. Well, let me go to our team first. Carrie or Eva or Amber, do you know? I know we sent the letters. I know we got some responses back from some people. Do you
I think
recall?
Eva and Amber should answer that question because they were the ones coordinating that.
And if we don't have the documents right here, we can get back to you maybe next week with an update. If we, it's, you know, there's a lot happening on this project. So I know we did send the letters. I know we did get some comments back. Amber, Eva, do you remember exactly?
I'd have to look into it. I think we've only had contact with one tribe or contact back with one member of the tribes, but we have sent out letters that you guys have talked about. And then after that first or second meeting that we discussed this at Gpac specifically, we also reached out again. And I believe we did have a member join us at one of our Gpac meetings as well after that.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah. So why don't we make a note, if we could, in answer to the question, let's just have a short agenda item next week to just give an update on that. But you know, in a nutshell, I think it is that we've actually made 2 different rounds of contact, and we have had perhaps limited, but at least some response, and we'll figure out exactly what that response has been.
Yeah. So I'm asking because I'm wondering what their take is. What would they like? I mean, I'd be in support of all of these, but I don't know what they would prefer. So I'd like some insight on what they would prefer or what other cities are doing. So there's a few different tribes around here that we can probably reach out to. And of course, we want to respect their traditions and protect their history. So I'm definitely willing to do any of all 5 of these or whatever else they'd like. Thank you.
Great. Okay. And just so you all know, in the Q&A, Carminder Brown has pointed out that the Amamutsan Land Trust is an organization whose mission overlaps with many goals of this general plan update, and we should make sure we've reached out to them. It's an interesting point because I'm not sure they qualify in our tribe list. So we'll make a note to reach out to them also for any input they have, even though they may not be technically a tribe. And then Anita Kane says that there should be required inclusion of interpretive tribal cultural education in park development. So that does echo the thing that Commissioner Huboy mentioned and that I repeated, that we should make sure that interpretation and education throughout development, especially in parks, is part of what we call for as well.
Yeah, and I want to just agree with everyone else. I agree with all of these as well, but I do have a question, and I just want to again be really clear. Do we have a definition for tribal cultural resources, or do we have a list of what that includes, or is that something that we as a body will be developing through this process?
So that is a term of art that's in the law. I can't recite it to you right now, but it's a good point that we should probably include in the general plan a definition of exactly what that means. But we don't need to invent that definition. It's one that the state has already put in place.
Okay, yeah, I think it would be good for us to look at it, only because I just want to make sure that we're not just talking about land resources, because there are other cultural resources that are important.
Right.
And I agree 100% with what Mr. Resendez said. We have to have the voice of tribal leaders. We can't just be going through this with our own like limited knowledge of what these are. So I think that's very important, but I think that the resources, I think we need to know what we're talking about when we're talking about resources, and make sure that it's a very comprehensive list, that it isn't something that's very limited.
Great. Carrie actually already found the definition and put it in the chat for me to read to you. It's a site, feature, place, or cultural landscape, which must be geographically defined in terms of size and scope, but also a sacred place or an object with cultural value to a California Native American tribe. So it's a pretty far-reaching definition that includes both individual sites, larger landscapes, as long as they're geographically defined, any other sacred places, and objects, and then just that has cultural value to a Native American tribe.
David?
Thank you.
I'm in contact with the tribal leader for the Amamutsan.
Great.
And I can get his contact information to Eva.
Great.
Okay. He has expressed that he would very much like to be involved.
Great.
Or participating or giving his input regarding this area.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll go with all 4 of those items that are listed here, as well as a 5th item to require interpretation and education where it's where there are resources in any development, park or residential or otherwise. All right, and I think that brings us to our last item, which is environmental justice. So again, as I mentioned, Senate Bill 1000 requires general plans to address environmental justice issues if a jurisdiction has an identified disadvantaged community. Hollister does not have a state-defined disadvantaged community, but nonetheless, we know that there are neighborhoods and parts of Hollister that do suffer from some of these environmental justice issues. And those include access to affordable and nutritious food, bike and pedestrian safe streets, reduced exposure to pollution, equal access to public services and facilities, and promoting public participation for people who live in those communities. So the question to all of you is, do you want us to go ahead and include in the general plan policies and actions that will address these issues? And particularly, we can do an analysis to identify those neighborhoods and make sure that they are, that the neighborhoods themselves really do receive treatment with regard to these 5 issues.
David, it's almost, to me, that environmental justice has enough in it to make it a separate element. I think there was something in the memo that I read regarding that. I would be a proponent of that.
Okay. Yeah, that just to clarify for all of you, the law does allow, even when an environmental justice element is required, which is not required here, the new law foresees either that it can be a standalone element or chapter, or that it can be included throughout the document. And you can honestly make either argument. Some people will say, well, make it its own element. That way it's front and center and people really see it in one place. Some people will say, well, it really should be a theme through the entire document. And why should it only be its own element? Why, when you want to talk about complete streets and complete neighborhoods, why not do that in the land use and circulation element? If you're going to be talking about reduced exposure to pollutants, you already have a safety element, why not do it there? So there's not necessarily a right answer on that, but at your direction, we can do it as a standalone element, or we can do it interwoven with all the elements. If we do it interwoven, I think we would still put it somewhere in an introduction that we have identified environmental justice as critical to the city and that we are incorporating it in all elements so that people know that it really is one of the features of this plan, even if it's not a standalone element.
Yeah, I know. I, as a resident, would love, for that to be woven within, all the different, instead of just having it be it's a standalone itself, having those addressed through the whole plan is, I think, very important. Like you said, David.
I agree with that, but for me, it just reads better to have it in its own little section, because then I can be like, okay, this is what it is. And then we can also, when we're writing the rest of the plan, interweave it. So if that's a possibility, I like having it separate section and also keeping that at the forefront when writing out the plan.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree too. I mean, I think that we have to have it interwoven because there's just no way to not talk about it when you're talking about all the other elements of the GP. But I think that when you have it separate section, that allows you to be really clear about what the goals are, what we're trying to accomplish, what the expectations are. That's harder to do when you're just interweaving it in all the other sections. So I think we can do both. I think it's important to do both.
Okay, I think that's clear from all of you. That actually concludes the program for tonight. It's 8:17, we're 13 minutes early. I want to remind you of our upcoming schedule. Next week, we will be doing a large number of issues related to economic development, but I think they'll go pretty quickly because it's a lot of lists like the one we saw tonight, and I imagine that for many of them, you'll feel supportive of many of the items. We'll also be looking at several issues related to circulation, complete streets, roundabouts, level of service, and we'll be looking at inclusionary housing. So it's a robust agenda, but again, one I think that's doable. And I'm very proud of all of us that we got through tonight in short order. And I think we can do that again next week. Honestly, perhaps the most robust agenda is Tuesday, April 6th, when we'll be talking about growth management, which includes this issue of sewer service in county areas that I alluded to this evening, 3 different special planning areas, and a couple of different items regarding residential land use designations. So there's a fair amount of issues there. That's sort of the hump in the process. The last 2 should be a little easier and more fun. On April 13th, we'll be talking about arts and culture. And then on April 27th, we'll be talking about greenhouse gas emissions. Commissioner Huboy mentioned sustainability. We'll talk about that there as well and add it to this list, as well as natural hazards and the local hazard mitigation plan. So that's the last of those meetings. I do see one person just put one other thing in the Q&A, which is just thanks for a great meeting and for tolerating so many comments from us. And I want to say, I think this went very well. We didn't have comments in the Q&A, in the comment period from the public, but we did get, I think it's like 13 or 15 individual comments in the Q&A chat, and I think we should do that again next time. It went pretty well. And I do want to ask, I'm not capable of doing it, but Carrie or Amber or Eva, can you be sure you do print out and save the Q&A thread before we close the meeting tonight? Yeah, so we have the 5 meetings coming up, including next week. Please do, if you're in the audience and Gpac members, let more people know about this. I think this has been a lot of fun. We had a lot of good interaction from our audience, and we'd welcome more people to be here in the audience and to give more comments as well. We do also have the survey that's dealing with all these same questions that's up and running on the website. And I didn't say, maybe I should say for the audience, it's a kind of a piecemeal survey. So you can click on each of these items like growth management or greenhouse gas emissions and just do a small survey on that one item. So it's easy to do just 1 or 2 pieces at a time. And then if you want to come back and do another piece, you can do another piece at another time. So don't be concerned that there's these 28 issues and you have to do them all. You don't have to do them all at once. You can do just a couple of parts of the survey at any given time. So we welcome you to work on the surveys. We welcome you to come back next Tuesday. We'll have the 5 meetings, and then in May and June, we will be in front of the Planning Commission and City Council. And unless members of the committee have anything more, I think we can close the meeting. Mr. Mayor, are there members, anything to add?
We don't have any other public speakers.
No other speakers have identified
Perfect.
themselves. And
Any other comments from the commissioners? Well, I want to thank all of you for your participation tonight. Glad to have you all on board. We have a full committee now, so it's exciting, and we have a lot of good work to do in front of us. So, Mr. Early, thank you again for all your hard work and your staff's work, and of course, City of Hollister's staff for all they're doing to make our community better. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second it. Everybody's seconding it.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor?
Hi.
Aye. Thank you all and good
Good
night.
night, everyone.
Thank you.
Night,
Thank you.
everybody.
Good work, everyone.
Good show.